If they get the signatures validated, then it's game on, and we turn around and go balls to the wall to go everything that we could possibly throw at them from what we've acquired monetarily, tit for tat, blow for blow, punch for punch, all the way till November 5th. And if we lose, I don't know where Colorado is going to be. I think it'd be a juggernaut and a blow to epic proportions about how Colorado wildlife is managed and how it trickles down to other states.
You're listening to the Born Primitive Podcast.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Born Primitive Podcast. We have a rare afternoon recording today, Tony. You can be able to do this.
This is our third
Yeah.
one. Yeah,
And
I usually you feel a little warmed up though. You've had meetings.
I just had a cold brew at lunch too, so I hope I'm not a total maniac for this one. But we'll see.
The heart rate's at
yes,
130
exactly.
right now,
I'm pumping at 130 right now. But we're excited for this one. Today's topic is slightly different than kind of our usual wheelhouse. For those of you that know, we have an outdoor division of our company, Born Primitive Outdoor. And a lot of our audience is in the Western hunting world. And we've kind of wanted to posture ourselves to support controversial topics, and we'll get into this, but there's a general kind of assault on hunting, and it kind of is interwoven into wildlife management. And as I've been more exposed to that, I realize some things that surprisingly a lot of outdoor brands that make their money and their living in that space are not supportive of, which blows me away because that's their target audience. And of course, we have fitness and tactical and shoes and all these other things. So we don't necessarily have to do that, but just as Tony and I, as everyday dudes, believe in it. But for Born Primitive Outdoor, I think it's particularly important to back the hunter and the hunting community, and posture ourselves in a way to hopefully be a voice for logic and reason on some things that are coming in through the ballot box, and I would argue kind of a backdoor way. So, without further ado, today's guest is Dan Gates. Dan Gates is the executive director at Coloradans for Responsible Wildlife Management and serves on multiple sportsmen and conservation organizations, including the Colorado Trappers and Predators Hunters Association, the Colorado Wildlife Council, and serves on the board of directors for Fur Takers of America. He's an avid outdoorsman and owner of the Colorado Rid-A-Critter, a wildlife control business in Canon City, Colorado. And you can learn more about Dan at cowildlifecouncil.org. And there's a lot we're going to get into. But Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate the opportunity and look forward to a spirited conversation.
Here we go. And honestly, Dan, this is not my wheelhouse by any means. So you're going to have to school me and I think Tony up a little bit on this. But I think the gist of what we wanted to get into, and I understand, Dan, there's some areas you can't go too deep on for reasons you discussed off air, and we'll kind of do our best to navigate around that. But I think the original kind of introduction of this, kind of comes through ballot box biology as it was explained to us of maybe something that was well-intended initially where, hey, of course this is a democracy, let people vote. And before you know it, you have things that are rooted in biology and kind of conservation and wildlife management that now some 22-year-old hippie in Denver can now vote on when they have zero knowledge on anything, on the actual implications of what they're voting on. And the wolf introduction probably is a good example. And if I was 21 years old and they were like, hey, do you want to bring wolves back? And I didn't know anything, I'd be like, probably, yeah, that's cool, wolves are cool. When there's actual, specialists and people that do this for a living that know the actual kind of order, kind of chain reaction effects of some of these things, might produce, even though on the surface they might sound harmless. And of course, why would we not? It's a concern, blah, blah, blah. But the people that, from what I've learned about, being in this space is that hunters have this stereotype that it's a bunch of hillbillies that just like to shoot guns and this and that. When you actually are in the space, you realize that hunters are the most, avid conservationists as it gets, because we want to protect the hunting lands, right? And the model for North American, conservation is you'd correct me, but is unprecedented and is the model that the whole world should be following. And it is recently, maybe not so recently, but it's a bit under attack by people that I would argue have no idea what the hell they're talking about. So I loaded that up with a lot.
Yeah.
Why don't I just let you respond to that, and then we'll get into it, Dan?
Well, thanks for the opportunity, Bear. I mean, you hit the nail on the head that, there's things in a democracy that people should be able to vote on. But there's a lot of things that people don't have the education or the knowledge to be able to make the right decision. When you talk about science-based wildlife management, and for instance, in Colorado, we have an agency that's got a little over 1,100 employees, Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And there's 350 scientists, biologists that work in that agency, and they've all got their individual field of expertise. We should be relying on them to make the decisions when it comes to our wildlife species and natural resources. And, for an example, and to give you some statistics, Colorado has 961 species of wildlife that this agency manages, 78 of which of those are game species. But hunter and fisher dollars, license fees, provide the funding mechanism for all of the 961 species. Now, I don't know everything about every single one of those species, nor do I profess to, but I do rely on the experts that have boots on the ground experience, plus a degree behind them to make the right decision, not only for that specific species, but how that interacts with all the other game species, whether they're waterfowl or small game or big game, a threatened and endangered species, or just a non-game species. And the experts compile all that information and data over decades and decades of science-based information to make the right decision on behalf of the wildlife. When you start talking about ballot box biology, the average person might have an opinion about wolves, as you mentioned, and we just reintroduced wolves into the state of Colorado through a ballot box procedure from 2020, and they were just put on the ground through the proper process and procedures according to the powers that be in December of 2023. Well, having wolves on the ground is one thing, but what about the other 961 species that are affected in some way, shape, or form? It's not like it used to be, 1,200 years ago when there was very few people besides indigenous people on the Colorado landscape, and the landscape has changed. The urban-rural divide component of that has changed. We got 5.9 million people in the state of Colorado with 84 million annual visitors that come here. The experts make the decisions on what is right when it comes to whatever species it is, and uneducated individuals, by being able to go to the ballot and check a box because they want to hear a wolf howl or they don't want anybody to harvest a mountain lion, is not the way to turn around and manage wildlife, in our opinion, to make sure that you're doing things appropriately and to do it in a sustainable fashion in perpetuity. And those people that could check that box, yes or no, on whatever ballot initiative when it comes to science-based stuff like wildlife and natural resources, they don't have the background to compress and compile all that information into one category to say, this is what's good for Colorado's wildlife and natural resources. I want wolves. Well, that doesn't address all the problems that go along with it. We are seeing that the general public is not stupid, and we are seeing that on decisions that they made recently on 2020 with the Proposition 114, which was to introduce wolves in the state, there's a little bit of buyer's remorse with some of those people. And they're like, well, I didn't realize it was going to be like that. I didn't know. I think if I did it now, I would vote a little bit differently. Well, that's hard to do when you already put wolves on the ground and there's already an adverse effect. No benefit yet, but an adverse effect of what those wolves are doing, not only for other wildlife resources, but the agriculture industry, the people that have to live with those wolves on a daily basis. And they're in the news every single day because they're killing something of somebody's that we were told that they wouldn't. Those are things that the general public doesn't fully understand or can rationalize and comprehend to the point to where it's much broader than just checking the box. And I think that ballot box biology is a piss poor way to manage wildlife, but it's also a piss poor way to turn around and try to go back and fix something that somebody was trying to fix on their own because they just didn't want somebody to harvest it. They didn't want something to be taken off the landscape. They were looking at one specific animal as opposed to a specific species of animals. Instead of looking at the yard that they got with all the green grass, they're looking at one blade of grass, and they think that they can turn around and manipulate the system and modify it and adapt it to their liking by checking the box. And I think it's a sad state of affairs of not only where we're at in Colorado, but how it's catching on, that they can't get what they want through general assemblies and legislatures. They can't get what they want through commission appointments like what we have here. We've got a board, a commission of 11 individuals. They can't get what they want, but they go through those things. So they go to the ballot thinking that they'll be able to get it from the uneducated public. And that's not the best way to turn around and look at our wildlife resources for now or in the future.
And Dan, who is the driving force behind what sounds like the oversimplification of what should be a very complex and robust kind of decision-making process as to whether to introduce or, like you said, manage a specific species? When you're saying who is the driving force behind a lot of these initiatives?
Well, the organization that we're up against right now is an organization called Cats Aren't Trophies, and but the back door side, the funding side of that, is primarily from an animal rights extremist agenda that's been building in the Western United States for quite some time. The main funder is Wayne Pacelli. Wayne Pacelli was the former HSUS of the Humane Society of the United States until several years ago, when he had some improprieties that he was released of his duties. And then he started this Animal Welfare Action Institute for a Humane Economy. And they're the ones who are funding this particular issue. So you've got out-of-state extremists trying to bring their mentality to in-state wildlife management, which now has become politically driven because of our current governor and his husband, who is an animal rights extremist and a proud animal rights extremist, to say the least. And so it's a perfect storm. You got politics, you got out-of-state interest, you got endless supplies of money, you got extremists that want to capitalize on something because they don't see any way, shape, or form that there should be anything harvested off the landscape. Their number is 0. It's not 6. It's not a reduction. It's not let's compromise. No, their number is 0. And so you add all of these things up and you look at the animal rights extremism agenda that is nationwide at this point in time, and Colorado is ripe for the picking because they've got all the pieces in place of their puzzle that they think that they need to try to accomplish what their goal is.
So do you, like, an exercise I always use is kind of steel manning when I'm in a complex issue that needs solved. Steel manning the other's kind of argument, I think, is always useful because you're literally putting yourself in their shoes, and I think you can approach them in their argument in a way that you can't if you just look at it as like them versus me. So if you needed to steel man their case, is there anything from your side that you look at and say like, okay, that makes sense, or has it truly become almost an ideology that it's what you just said a couple minutes ago about like, no, this is literally an ideological belief that there should be 0 harvesting of animals, or that, and I guess the wolf introduction one would be an interesting one to speak about as well. But the question is, when you look at their kind of side and their argument, are there layers to it where some people on that side you say, hey, I can actually relate to where they're coming from, or for the most part, does it make you want to pull your hair out as somebody who's extremely educated on the issue as a whole?
I want to pull their hair out, not my hair out. But with all due respect, I mean, I give the opposite side that I have fought against for the last 20 some odd years a fair amount of credit when it comes to passion. You know, they're no less passionate than I or you or any other sportsman or women in the state of Colorado or around the country about wildlife. It's just that they have a different ideology when it comes to their passion. Their passion is 0. There is no acceptable number. They don't believe in anything that should be harvested for any reason because they don't consider you and I to be part of the ecosystem. We're not part of the biodiversity. They keep talking about wildlife this and wildlife that, but they fail to mention the human component of that. And when it really gets down to it, if you look at their background and their ideologies, it goes into the wildlife itself, but then it goes into agriculture, and it goes into farming and ranching, and it goes into pet ownership, and it goes into rodeo animals, and it goes into zoos. No, they're the extreme extremists, like what we're dealing with right now. No way, shape, or form do they think that I or you should be able to harvest anything for any reason unless it's in self-defense, and then it becomes the property of the state. And that's not sound science, for one, but it's not based on the facts and the data or the statistics that have been compiled over the course of the last 125 years, or the model that you mentioned, the North American model of wildlife conservation. My ideology is that, you know, since the beginning of time, we have been hunter-gatherers, and some of us have decided to stick on that side of it. Some of us have not because of social demographics or ideologies or methodologies or whatever. But what they want us to do is to comply to their lifestyle and their belief system and think that everything's just going to manage itself. Well, it might if we were 1,200 years ago and we didn't have people on the landscape. But they don't consider us to be part of that equation or that formula to help wildlife be sustainably managed in perpetuity, like I mentioned. They think that their way is right and our way should be the highway, no matter what number it is, no matter what species, no matter what season or method it take.
And Dan, how does it get introduced on the ballot? Does it have to get, like, is it a petition thing, or if it gets 50,000 signatures, it's automatically added? And I'm guessing these lobbyists and these groups are pushing that. But how are these things, just from a process standpoint, how are they showing up on the ballot?
Well, and that's a good question too. There's 26 states that have ballot initiatives available to them. And some of them are different setups and different nuances of what it takes to actually get something on the ballot. But you or I could formulate some off-the-wall ballot language that we want to turn around and have the voters vote on, such as, I'm being facetious here, nobody in the state of Colorado could drive a Volvo after dark. Okay, that sounds stupid, but in theory, the way the system is, you could do that. If I didn't want people with blonde hair to walk their pit bulls on Sunday, I could do a ballot initiative in theory. Now, the likelihood of it getting on the ballot and passing is not very good, but the process is so lenient that anybody can come up with any cockamamie thing that they want to try to accomplish, and they file a petition with the Secretary of State. Then there's a legal process, which we had to engage in for the first 4.5 or 5 months of this, through the Secretary of State, the Title Board, the Supreme Court. We went through multiple hearings, cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, had attorneys and strategists all involved on both sides of the fence. And when it was said and done and over with, we changed the language of the title itself, but could not change the language of the measure. So the title we actually got trophy hunting out of, because now it's a hunting ban. It's not a trophy hunting ban. And so that's a big distinction on where they want to go, because they were willing to settle for, okay, you took trophy hunting out. We're going to go ahead and use trophy hunting as part of our advertising message. But if you read the language, it's a hunting ban. And so to get things on the ballot, they went through that entire process, and then they still had to go out and get signatures. And in Colorado, we needed 124,238 signatures to qualify for the ballot. And how they get to those numbers are, that's 2% of the last numbers, the people that voted for the Secretary of State in the state of Colorado. So they just recently completed that task. They actually had to go out and get a firm to help them acquire the rest of the signatures that they needed. And now those signatures are sitting in the Secretary of State's office waiting to be validated. So they turned in supposedly 188,000 some odd signatures to hopefully get enough to qualify to be validated, which would be the 124,238. If they meet that threshold, we're on the ballot. If they don't meet the threshold, maybe we dodged a bullet for this go around, but that doesn't mean we stopped them, because they're going to come at us at every other level. If they get the signatures validated, then it's game on come September 5th. In Colorado, the mail-in ballots will be mailed out by October 5th, and those people will have 30 days until November 5th to turn those ballots in. So we've got about a 60-day war ahead of us, starting the 5th of September to the 5th of November, if those signatures are validated. And if they're not validated, then we go on the offense and figure out what we need to do to capitalize on a short victory. And if they are validated, then it's game on, and we turn around and go balls to the wall to go everything that we could possibly throw at them from what we've acquired monetarily, the support that we've gotten from guys like you and other podcasters and industry leaders around the country, the money that's been generated from around the country. And then we turn around and go tit for tat, blow for blow, punch for punch, all the way till November 5th. And if we're successful then it's game on for us to turn around and try to move the needle positively, proactively, preemptively. And if we lose, I don't know whether that's an excuse or not, but I don't know where Colorado is going to be if we lose this, because if you look at what happened in 2020 on the Wolf deal, and if we were to lose this, I think it'd be a juggernaut and a blow to epic proportions about how Colorado wildlife is managed and how it trickles down to other states.
Unpack this specific one a little more, Dan. I think it's the hunting ban that you're specifically referencing, and I think there might be another word in there. But can you talk a little more of the details on what that actually is?
The way that they've got it written, and it specifically defines trophy hunting in the measure, not in the ballot title, but in the measure, where it says trophy hunting is defined as intentionally killing, wounding, and stalking, pursuing, or entrapping a mountain lion or bobcat. If that's set in statute, where they define trophy hunting as hunting, there's not another place in the country that trophy hunting is defined. If they do that the first time here, you could turn around and put bighorn sheep or elk or mallard ducks or whatever you wanted to in there as a preemptive strike from their side because of the precedent that would be set through this entire process. You know as well as I do, I mean, court precedent is a major ruling when decisions are made at different levels. If there's a statutory definition on what trophy hunting is, and they define it as trophy, defined it as hunting, as intentionally killing, well, that's hunting. Pursuing, that's attempting to hunt. Stalking, that's hunting. I don't know anybody that intentionally wounds anything, but if you use those other three components, and that's defined as trophy hunting, how easily can it be, misconstrued in somebody's eyes, whether it's the 10th, Circuit Court or a Parks and Wildlife Commission or the New Mexico legislature? Anybody can use what somebody else already utilized and said, this is what it is, and this is how we need to interpret it to be able to utilize it for our benefit. A secondary component to that, guys, is because they're trying to get rid of lion and bobcat hunting, because of the statutory side of it, that they can actually word and define how dogs are used with electronic collars and tracking devices. And because it would be in statute, you tell me how they wouldn't be able to turn around and carry that on to a bird dog or a waterfowl dog or a raccoon dog or a rabbit dog or maybe even a stock dog, because they're naming specific tools that would not be applicable in the pursuit of game, because trophy hunting would be defined as hunting. Those are things that the average person doesn't really realize just how serious this could be, because I get guys walk up to me all the time. Gates, I've already killed my lion. I wish you all the luck in the world. Or I don't hunt mountain lions. I'm a bird hunter. You start letting them read the language, and then they get this light bulb that comes on above their head, and they're like, well, how could this not affect me somehow? That's where we're trying to get that message out, to where it's not a Colorado issue. It's not a mountain lion and bobcat issue. It's a hunting issue, and they define that by the definition of trophy hunting by utilizing hunting.
So bottom line is, this is a way to get their foot in the door and create legal and, I guess, legislative precedent that other entities could then use and add on to make it even more restrictive. Is that a fair assessment?
That's a fair assessment, and it's broken down so simplistically in the language of the measure that when you read it, you just, if you have open eyes and you take mountain lions and bobcats out of it, there's no way, shape, or form that can be any other thing than a camel nose under the tent or to get their foot in the door.
Well, I think the scary thing about this is, like, you take Colorado, for example. You got Denver and Boulder, and then, the rest of the state. Denver and Boulder are not kind of indicative of Colorado, but from a pure population standpoint, unfortunately, they are the majority population. But when you actually look at the state, it's people like you, Dan, that are the real people in Colorado where this affects. So I think there's real danger in allowing a special interest group that is bankrolled by some billionaire, probably funding this initiative for a personal issue that he or she, says is, all right, this is going to be the hill I die on. Here's $1 billion. Go fight this fight. And then you get a bunch of people in Boulder and Denver that will never be, backcountry hunting, or they will never. Someone in Denver is not going to feel the effects of wolves getting introduced into the ecosystem, right? A rancher is going to experience that when his cattle are getting shredded to pieces in the middle of the night, and then he can't defend them because he's got to worry about some fine he's going to get if he shoots a wolf. Those are the people that are actually affected, but the people in Denver and Colorado or in Boulder have all the power because they're the majority of the population, and it's just, it's a real, aside from just this, the ballot initiative in general is a pretty dangerous thing because, some voter's going to walk up with very little context and look at some checkbox in the quick paragraph or whatever that's underneath it and say, oh, that sounds good. Yeah, I'm against that. And they have no idea. So that's the scary thing for me. And I don't know what the solution is, but something you said I thought was interesting. I think you said there's 1,100 biologists and scientists, at the state level, that their only job is to manage, the 961 species you talked about. And I would imagine, I think we can make the conclusion likely that the people on the far left are the ones pushing this initiative, and the people who tend to lean right likely want to preserve the ability to hunt and that sort of thing. I think that's a fair general assumption to make. I would guess, though, a lot of those biologists and scientists are probably left leaning, but they're also scientists, so they know the science and they can probably remain objective from a biological issue. So it's weird. Where do they come into play? Because as I'm seeing this, they have no say in this. When there's 1,100 biologists, why would they not be leveraging and let's say the governor and these people, are they not leaning on those people, again, who probably most of them share their own party affiliation? I'm gonna guess of those 1,100, 800 of them are probably Democrats. That's just a guess. So why would not the governor go to his own people who are the experts and say, hey, we want to do this, but this is ideologically driven, but you're the scientist. What is this actually going to do? What's the chain of events that's going to occur here? Now, I know there's probably, I'm dreaming. That's never going to happen because that would be logical and rational and, trying to be objective and, you know what I mean, which our politicians are not. But what say, if any, do these 1,100 scientists have? And can we get them more in the mix? Are they being vocal about this? Are they even allowed to be vocal about it?
No, and just for correction, I mean, it's 1,100 employees with 350 scientists. But interesting enough, we've got more scientists in the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Agency than a lot of game agencies have employees. I mean, to stop and think that we have more than what they do total employees. But they have a gag order. I mean, the director can't say anything. The executive director can't say anything. The leadership team can't say anything. The scientists can't say anything. If you listen to what they say, they have no position because neutral is a position. They're not pro, they're not con, they're not neutral. They have no position because they were told you don't have a position. Those are the things that are hard for us to deal with when the animal rights extremists know full well that they don't have to go against the science themselves because the scientists can't say what they know and what they've studied and what they've documented and what they've compiled and what's peer reviewed. They know that the opposition to their efforts will not sit anything other than idle on the sidelines because the governor, who they work at the pleasure of, has decided they won't take a stand on this. And those are the hardest things that we have to deal with. But that's not uncommon. They're doing it in Washington right now. They're doing it in Oregon right now. There's things that have happened in California. Most recently, New Mexico. You look at other Western states, whether it's Utah or Nevada or Arizona or Idaho, there's nuances to all of this that are working and churning like a great big lobster in a pot that somebody's going to get boiled at some point in time because the demographics are changing so much since COVID started and people are mass exodus out of different states and moving to other places, taking their ideologies, electing other people in there. It just so happens that Colorado started about 20 some odd years ago. But if you have leadership, politicians that have brought politics into wildlife management for an agenda and then won't let the scientists profess the science, that's it. What else is that besides obstruction? What is it besides agenda-driven tactics to turn around and accomplish what you or what your husband actually wants? Those are the things that we're up against, and we're doing a really good job of kicking things back and holding things at bay right now. No pun intended with the dogs, but we're in a point now to where politics is taking so much wind out of the sails of the science. We keep professing the science, but everybody's like, well, why don't the scientists say anything? Well, it's because the boss told them not to. I mean, if you work at Microsoft and the boss tells you don't say anything about the airline debacle over the weekend, you're not going to say anything because you might not have a job. If you work at Walmart and you don't like the way things are being imported from China, you probably aren't going to say anything because you might not have a job. These are the same positions that our scientists are in. They know the facts, they know the data, they know the statistics, they know the boots on the ground experience. and they can't say it because they've been told to shut the hell up.
And when did that start taking place, Dan? Is that just something that has always been in place and they've just found a unique way to leverage it? Or is this something that, was there like a moment in time where things started to shift towards where like that type of thing, which is, and Bear said it, like just seems completely irrational that we would not be leaning on the professionals who spend all day analyzing this. But when did this stem from?
1992, Initiative 10 in the state of Colorado banned the spring bear hunting with baits and hounds. So we just have fall spot and stalk bear hunting. That was an initiative. 1996, we had Amendment 14 that banned trapping in the state of Colorado. Both of those were under Governor Romer at the time, and Governor Romer took the same stance of what this individual, Governor Polis, is, that you won't speak. When Governor Romer was out and Governor Owens, a Republican, the first Republican governor that we've had in 56 years in the state of Colorado, he came out and things were a little bit more lenient. He cared about wildlife, but it wasn't a passion of his to where he was going to try to stop it all. That was the last Republican governor that we had. That was the first one that we had in many, many decades. And this agenda that started back in 2020 or 2000 itself, that actually escalated all the way up to 2020, started back when Governor Owens, the Republican, the last Republican governor, took office. And they laid a plan of attack, the opposition did, to turn around and make sure that they never had to deal with that again. So Colorado has become a blue state. We have very little red, and more often than not, it's pink or somewhat purple. But when you get legislators and you get agenda-driven administrations trying to guide the ship on what they see fit, it becomes really hard to turn around and get, the facts and the data and the statistics out there. And keep in mind, I want to say this because underneath this administration, our opposition tried these tactics through the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission in 2020, 2021, and 2022. And we defeated them on each occasion. In 23, we defeated them at the Colorado State Legislature. And I can tell you, the only option that they had was to turn around and come back in this level with the ballot initiative. But we beat them on every other playing field, even with this governor and even with the appointments that he made in those positions and even with an unfavorable legislature. And now we're dealing with this, and this is something that other Western states ought to pay real close attention to, because it happens by people moving into state with different ideologies, putting people into office with different mentalities and agendas, and then not being able to turn around and get the facts and the data and the statistics out there that is necessary. And that's why we have these agencies.
And play this out over, let's just, for the sake of conversation, let's play out a scenario where they build some momentum and maybe these things get pushed through. The ban on mountain lions and bobcats gets pushed through. I know you mentioned earlier that, like, hey, this will not be one unique event. Like this, they will then kind of go after a broader inclusion of species in that ban. But play out if they start to build some momentum. What do you think the next step is, and what do you think some of the ripple effects, if they start to get what they think is the an ideal end state? What are some of the negative ripple effects that you're going to start to see as somebody who's deep in this field?
There's already been conversations, guys, at the Colorado General Assembly, at the legislature, that if this was to pass, some particular legislators have already considered running legislation that would stop the harvest of cow, elk, and doe deer during archery season because of the potential orphaning of calves and fawns. Those are same languages that they're utilizing on the mountain lion and the bobcat deal. They know that if they can capitalize on this from a ballot initiative perspective, that the people of Colorado have spoken, that it'll be easier for them to get something across the line through the legislature. Now, it seems like, you're grasping at straws saying, well, they're going to go after deer and elk hunting. And the average guy might say, no, it won't happen in my lifetime. But if you set the tone and the narrative and the launching pad about a statutory precedent, about a definition of hunting, and you utilize or let the opposition utilize, orphaning, abandonment, kittens and cubs, it can easily be translated in just from misinformation, if nothing else. And if they get that done and then go to the legislature and we can't beat them here, I don't know how the hell we're supposed to beat them at the legislature when they want to turn around and take other species off for whatever reason they might claim. And those are things that I've even asked Colorado Parks and Wildlife myself. When do you make a stand? When do you turn around and throw the gloves off and say enough is enough? My boss said this, but we know the facts, and we're not going to turn around and put up with this. I don't know whether they have enough ass in their britches to do that straight across the board, because, look, a lot of these people are my friends. I've dealt with them for the last 25 or 30 years. They got kids in college. They got mortgages. They got pensions. I understand all that. But there has to be some ethics, morals, and values that are put aside to say enough is enough. If I'm doing this, am I doing it just for the job, or am I doing it for the reasons that I got into the job and to the career? And if they decide, the opposition decides to go on the full assault after winning this November, you'll see it immediately during the next legislative session come January and February of 2025. And then I think all bets are off, because this governor is term limited, will be out in 26. We'll have appointments made through 26 that might last 4 to 8 years after his departure that we would still have to deal with. He could be gone and we'd still have to deal with the people that he appointed. Those are things that people really ought to pay attention to, because it's not just Colorado that sets the tone and the narrative. The antis, the extremists, are using Colorado as a molding melting pot to see what they can get accomplished, and just to carry that momentum and set the tone and be able to turn around and expand that network through other states, especially when it comes to big game and predator management.
Yeah, I feel like the one place that you could get them is when it hurts them economically. You know what I mean? I'm just looking at this. I wonder if there would be a chain reaction though, where there's a negative economic effect, right? So maybe tourism goes down, and like I'm seeing the fur ban ballot initiative. Yeah, that would ban sale of cowboy hats, fishing lures, and Native American crafts and fur products as well. Like, I mean, you push that through. Like, you're really going to ban the sale of cowboy hats in a state that probably sells a lot of them? Eventually, those people that run those businesses are going to start getting affected, and now their vote matters. So maybe before they were pro this initiative, and then they're like, well, wait a second, now I can't do this. So you might gain more allies, even if people are, ideologically leaning left, that they say, all right, this is ridiculous. This now affects me and me running my business and my family. So, I mean, that would be my only hope. But what you're up against, Dan, is like, if you're in a super liberal state, there's way more 21-year-olds in Boulder who are drinking an IPA right now, and have a scarf around their neck than guys that look like you, Dan. I hate to say it, right? And that's why Colorado, I feel like, is the perfect place for this experiment, in almost a kind of a scary way, because if they can, like you said, set that precedent, and then there can be a domino effect in other states. That's where I think, but there has to be an economic impact, I feel like, for the playing field to be evened up a little bit. Otherwise, what is the resistance? You know what I mean?
Well, and I couldn't agree more. And the problem is that if you just look at most Western states, they're urban states, but the urban rural divide has become exacerbated so much. Colorado, for instance, we got 64 counties. On the wolf deal, 57 counties voted against the wolf, and we still lost by a little over 1%. That wasn't significant, but it's significant enough to turn around and say you lost. I mean, if you lost the Super Bowl by 1 point because you didn't make the extra point, you lost the damn Super Bowl. And we're to a point now to where most Western states, look at New Mexico, Albuquerque and Santa Fe. You look at Arizona. You got Phoenix and Scottsdale and Tucson. You look at Nevada. You got Reno and Clark County with Vegas. You look at Idaho. It's the Coeur d'Alene, Idaho Falls, Boise. You look at Montana. You got the big cities. They're making the decisions on the entire rural economy, the entire landscape. And I think that that's probably going to be the demise of the West as we know it, if we don't figure out a way to change the ability for people to vote on things that they have no skin in the game, no education about. And I don't know. I mean, here's the deal. People keep asking us and criticizing what we're doing, guys, that well, maybe you ought to do legislation or run a ballot initiative yourself. And I said, well, we could probably do that. We could probably run a ballot initiative to take away the ability for the voter to be able to vote on wildlife issue. But the voter has to vote on the ability to take away the wildlife side of it. So now you got to get a ballot initiative to get to the people to say, we don't want you to vote on this, but we want you to vote on not being able to vote on it. Nobody's going to do that. There's no way, shape, or form. So there has to be a different structure in place to make sure that when it comes to things like renewable resources, oil and gas, public land use, water, wildlife, things that we have in the West that you don't have to worry about so much in the East. I mean, there's a component of that, but the public land side of what we have in Colorado, for instance, we got 26 million acres of public land. We got 33,000 farms and vacant land properties in the state of Colorado. 84 million visitors, like what I mentioned. We have such a dynamic that people can't comprehend from other locations, because they realize when they came to Colorado 30 years ago on vacation or a ski trip, this was utopia. Now it's become the epicenter for animal extremism and the urban mentality of that mass exodus that I talk about. I don't know how you change it. I just know that if we don't stop it by 1% or 0.5% this year, that juggernaut's just going to keep rolling, and it's going to keep gaining steam. And it's going to become a giant snowball to make an avalanche. And that 57 counties that voted against the wolf deal, likely in time, will still be somewhere between 55 and 57 counties, but will lose by a larger and larger margin because of those other 7 counties that are going to grow in population exponentially to the point to where you're never going to catch up. You can never turn around and turn the cards back. And that's where we're so concerned at this point, because we realize wholeheartedly from our community, if we lose this, there's no way to make it back up. You're not going to get it back. And I don't know whether you can stop any more of it from happening.
As somebody who's been doing this for upwards of 30 years now, Dan, do you remain optimistic?
I remain optimistic in the sense that we're seeing a movement, and we're seeing a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel. I'll tell you the most admirable thing that we're doing right now is 80% of the money that we've generated has been out of state to fight these issues. The most dissatisfactory component is 20% of the revenue we've generated is from in-state. But people in-state are starting to pay attention because of the slaughterhouse ban. That's a food source that they're trying to get rid of. The fiber ban, which is the fur ban, like you mentioned on the cowboy hats and the fishing lures and the Native American crafts. The wildlife management or the hunting side of it. The extremists are screwing with our food, our fiber, and our ability to manage our natural resources. And people are starting to pay attention. They're starting to see that maybe my decision to check the box on wolves wasn't the right thing to do. Maybe I should let the experts handle that. I didn't know that they were going to cause that big of a problem. I didn't know they were going to be in the news every day. I didn't know that the legislature every year was going to raise my taxes by $1 million collectively to pay for 10 wolves because we didn't have a plan in place. I think that the general public is starting to wake up to extremist mentalities because it's starting to affect them personally, or somebody that they know personally, or something that they engage in regularly. And I honestly believe that there's a tipping point. But the scariest thing to me is there's such a margin of error that's so close that if you're losing or winning something by 0.5 percentage point or a percentage point, it shows how evenly divided we are as a community about what should happen to our natural resources, what should happen to our water, what should happen to oil and gas or renewable energy. A lot of what we do in this state is 51 to 49 or 50.5 to 49.5. There's no 60s to 40s there anymore. And when we did have a 68 to 32 here about a year and a half ago, it was on Proposition HH, and it was a Tabor tax deal. The governor didn't like the direction that the voters voted on, 68% against it. So he called a special session, and the legislature went back and changed the will of the voter. Now, that pissed voters off, but did it piss them off enough to where they want to turn around and say enough is enough on these wildlife issues that we're facing here? I don't know, but it's a better opportunity for optimism than what I would have had 4, 5, 6 years ago. But we were winning so much at the legislature and at the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission at the time. I didn't think that we could get to the point to where we're so bad off as what we are right now. But I'm seeing this tipping of the teeter-totter a little bit to the point where people are starting to go, maybe we should pay attention to what is going on around us and not just be worried about what affects us personally.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Once it starts affecting the everyday person, particularly in their bank account, that's when people will maybe throw away political ideologies and think a little bit more practically. And I think, the far extreme side of either stance of anything eventually is going to be hard to sustain unless you have a very calculated misinformation campaign that's backed by, millions and billions of dollars in special interests, which is absolutely a thing. But I think you're kind of seeing this in California, not on the hunting side, but just in the absolute extreme policies they've adopted. You have normal people, moderates, even left-leaning left, that are just like finally like, all right, what the hell has this state become? You know what I mean? Where basically it's lawless. People can just shit all over the streets. In San Francisco, you got people with heroin needles in their arms and they can't get arrested. And it's like this, it was almost this like romantic adoption of this, like, oh, this is the new way and this is so progressive. And then you have everyday people that now have to have, their daughter walk through the streets and see this, where a guy's shitting himself with a syringe out of his arm. And they're finally like, all right, how does this align with anything we believe in? And I think they're going to get a jolt of reality, because I just don't think that's sustainable unless you can absolutely brainwash the public. And obviously they control the media, they control social media other than X. They definitely have the high ground and leverage in many ways. But also when the everyday person is affected, I don't care what CNN is saying, I don't care what Meta is sanctioning on their news feed that they can't see and shadow banning people. Eventually, people are going to come to their senses and say, all right, what the hell are we doing here? And I think that this is a similar kind of analogy here, obviously specific to what you're doing. And I personally think in November, there's going to be a rude fucking awakening for a lot of people. And this is just Bear's opinion. I think a lot of Democrats are going to debrief it and say, all right, what the fuck did we just do for the last 4 years? Because in November, it will be very apparent what the everyday American wants. And this transcends many things, not just what you're talking about. Typically, I think extremism on either side is never the answer. I think usually the answer is somewhere in the middle, right? But unfortunately, these people, they position themselves on that, especially right now, the far left, and you're seeing things every freaking day where you're scratching your head. California just banned if a kid decides to change their gender, the parents aren't allowed to hear about it, right? They're not, the teacher has to, it's like, all right, you're telling me a 7th grader has got to get a permission slip to go to the fucking apple orchard, but all of a sudden they want to do a sex change and the parents aren't allowed to know? Like, you think that's going to be a popular law in California? Like, who the hell is coming up with this shit? It's so ridiculous you don't know what's satire and what's real, right? And you don't even have to be like a diehard into politics to have a stance on them. You got everyday dudes like Joe Rogan coming out being like, what, and he's a Democrat. Elon Musk, he was a lifelong Democrat. He just endorsed Trump. So I think I'm a little bit more optimistic, Dan, that I think just everyday people will eventually come forward and stop being so afraid to voice their opinion on these things, and eventually they're not going to. You want to shadow ban me? Go ahead. I mean, we've kind of in the same way. Now these are opinions of Bear and Tony, whatever yours is, but we've gotten unafraid to say that because eventually people just need to stop being so shy and passive about this and realize that there's real implications on these things, and we can't let the Soroses of the world and all these dickheads that have billions of dollars that are pushing these crazy initiatives to take hold. And it sounds like that's happening with you obviously in the wildlife space, but that's transcending every part of our society right now, and it's fucking crazy.
I'll tell you something, Bear, that's comical, because I had a guy, he outreached to me last December. We were 4 months into the legal side of this campaign, and he's a prominent, well-known fly fisherman, has a shop in Denver, and he hit me up and he said, I just don't see where you're coming from on this stuff, Gates, when it comes to the mountain lions, the bobcats, and I'm one guy that would probably have to vote for this. And I said, you got to be shitting me. I said, we sit on the same coalition together, and we're a sportsmen's coalition. We got 30 different organizations sitting on this thing. I'm the vice chair of that thing, and it just made me think real hard about who we were dealing with and at what education level we needed to turn around and try to get those guys involved. Well, as soon as the fur ban deal came out and we got legal guidance on the definition of what that would include, which was the fishing lures and everything, I went to him. It's fly fishing lures. It's regular fishing lures. And I said, did you see this? And he said, no, what is that? And I told him, and he goes, well, who the hell is coming up with this crap? And I'm like, yeah, that's what I've been asking on the mountain lion and bobcat deal. And he goes, well, that won't pass, what? And I said, it's a fur ban. The average person is going to look at this and say, I don't want some rich bitch wearing bobcat fur that was shipped to China to come back over here in some garment. They're not going to look at it from a fishing lure or a fly fishing deal or a cowboy hat deal. I said, you are on the chopping block, just like I am. And there was just this profound look on his face, like, well, but that's my livelihood. It's my shop. It's been there 30 years, and I don't know what would I do? And I would have to move out of the city. And I said, yeah, but if they've already said that they want to, if they get it done in the city, they want to go statewide. And he just looks and he goes, where are these lunatic bastards coming from? And I said, that's what I've been saying for the last 30 years. But now it's in your wheelhouse. But you're such an elite fisherman that you thought that it could never affect you because it was about fish. I think that you are right that maybe we're not going to see a mass exodus to the opposite side, from the opposite side to us, but it doesn't have to be. We don't have to convince 30% of the voters that voted against us on different things. We just got to convince 1 or 2%. 1 or 2% of those guys plus our guys is enough to turn around and carry the load. That's where I think that United States is when it comes to a lot of things that you and I would probably think similarly on, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's wildlife, whether it's natural resources, maybe it's taxes or firearms. I don't know. But I think that people are getting to the point of where they say it affects you and I don't give a shit. Wait a minute. How can it affect me? Aren't you going to help me? And I think that that's where we got into, because they're looking for us to be able to turn around and help them, because we were the only ones that was looking for help on any other level.
It's so complicated. I know Tony and I have put our tinfoil hats on a few times in here, and it's really hard to kind of wrap your head around all the different powers that be, and the financial interests people have, the ideological interests people have, and when you weave that into politics with backdoor deals and lobbying and backdoor promises or backroom promises, I've adopted, unfortunately, a much more pessimistic viewpoint on just our politicians and how our country is run. When you kind of get a peek behind the curtain of how ugly it is, President Biden released a letter saying he's not running next year. We haven't heard from the guy. No official appearance. The primary now, 14 million voters that voted in a primary, their votes are completely irrelevant now. It looks like Kamala Harris will be the candidate, has never even entered a primary. She dropped out last time before Iowa. So she might be the first president ever to never get a primary vote, a single vote. So, I mean, it's interesting, obviously I'm on the other side of the aisle. It's probably not hard to tell that. But when you zoom out and realize what just happened, you have a bunch of elites that in a closed door worked a deal to basically handpick a candidate, and that goes around the will of the people. Now, and if this was on the Republican side, I would say the same thing, because I think you got to be able to call it both ways. And I think both sides are really bad at calling it both ways. Like I think, Tony, when, the Republicans do something jacked up, like if this were to happen in the future, like we need to be objective enough to be like, yo, we need to call that shit out, because then we're just as guilty as the other side. But I think in this moment in time, we are seeing the most hypocritical thing happening where, democracy's on the line, and you're literally hijacking democracy by handpicking your candidate through backdoor deals with super powerful people. And imagine, of course, the Obamas, the Clintons, the Pelosi's, but what billionaires do you think were in that conversation as well? What kind of financial package do you think was given to the president to get him to all of a sudden 180 overnight on his stance, where just a week ago, I'm not dropping out, okay? What did they have blackmail on him? Did his 50 years in politics finally, catch up to him, that all the skeletons that were in his closet that the Pelosi's and the Obamas and the Clintons know about were just dangled in front of him, of like, all right, here's your severance package, take it, or here's plan B. All these things get revealed that most people probably already suspected were the case. So it's just, man, it's a bit scary. And I think, this issue, as well as, obviously November is going to be nuts. I think for most reasonable people, we gotta like let the extremes not influence just, how united we are, because they're doing a really good job of dividing us. The media does a really good job of that. And it's almost like they're just producing a dynamic where it's the extremes on both sides are getting kind of the loudest voice, and it's a little bit scary, but super fascinating to get into this. And obviously, Dan, we'll be, keeping our eyes on this as we get closer to November. And I would have to think, these things wouldn't pass, but And I think that the biggest thing, your point you're bringing up, Dan, that is the most fascinating is because, again, just like the wolf ban, on the surface, someone be like, all right, what the hell are they talking about? Mountain lions and bobcats? Like, who cares? They're going to ban that? Big deal. But you hit the nail on the head. It's the precedent, right? This is the one domino that leads to the rest of the dominoes, and you are immersed in that world enough to know that that's exactly what's happening. Where an everyday Joe like me, if I'm in Denver or Boulder and I see that, all right, big deal. Yeah, I'll vote against that. Those animals seem cute and cool, and I don't want them to be endangered, blah, blah, blah. So I don't really fault the actual voters because I just think they're a bit misinformed, and I don't think that vote is malicious. I think it's the power structure behind it that is what really we need to target because that's the real villain in this story, not the 21-year-old kid in Denver that I like to make fun of that, was voting for his first election and wants to be this, this activist progressive voter. I don't fault them for that. They're passionate and they have a view on the political side of the aisle that, is different from me. But hey, that's the American process. We need to embrace that. But it's what's under the surface of all that I think that is a bit more ominous and concerning.
It's their stick. It's what they were good at, is they lie and lie and lie and lie. And if you tell lies enough and you do it through different channels, other people start to believe it because they just hear the lies. I'll just give you a quick example. Is in 1965, mountain lions in the state of Colorado were still deemed a nuisance. They could be shot on sight because they were a threat to livestock. In 1965, sportsmen and women turned around and came together with the Game and Fish Department at the time and made mountain lions a big game species. They became regulated. They became monitored and studied with quotas and data and statistics. From 1965 until now, we've gotten roughly 5,000 mountain lions on the landscape. But before 65, when they were a nuisance, there was 200. And so it shows what regulated hunting has done through this guided management process under the North American model. My point is that when Wayne Pacelli and Pat Craig with Cats Aren't Trophies got on a webinar, they said, well, if they keep getting harvested at this rate, they're going to become extinct. They're going to become extinct. We've grown 40 times or whatever the hell since we've started regulating the harvest of these. But if we keep harvesting them at this rate, they're going to become extinct. No facts, no data, just a blanket statement thrown against the wall that gets the publicity of the media because that's what they carry. Look, they're going to go extinct. Under regulated hunting in the United States and North America, regulated hunting has never caused the extinction of any game species, of none, let alone big game. And so, but when they say it enough, and that's what the media picks up on, and that 21-year-old kid that you referenced, or maybe it's the 85-year-old gal that, she just doesn't like the killing of anything because she sends $19 a month to the ASPCA thinking that it's going to every humane society in the country. Those are the things that hurt us. And then on top of that, as I mentioned, because the governing agency, the managing agency with 350 scientists can't correct the falsehoods, fallacies, and lies, we're already up against the wall like a redneck mother trying to figure out how we're going to turn around and compete with the lies of the antis, let alone turn around and try to speak on behalf of the scientists themselves. And I think that that's the travesty when it comes to the nation's wildlife resources. We have the most wannabe emulated, duplicated model in the world when it comes to wildlife. Canada and the United States, the North American model of wildlife conservation. I just came from South Africa. I just returned on Sunday. I hunted over there. And they have a perfect system for what they have, but they talk about what we have because of the public trust doctrine and the resource. They've privatized it over there to where it's a very well-established process, but it's not public. We have it public here, but you and I and the animal activist and the non-hunter are a part of that public, and that's what we have to be proud of. But we can't have the scientists turn around and say that because politics has gotten into it. And I think that that's the travesty that my kid is probably going to have to live with, and his kid is probably not going to be able to turn around and do what we have been able to grow up and do and what we live by, unless we stop it now, because it's going to continue to grow like a cancer, and you know how that turns out.
Yeah, and that's the crazy irony of all of it is if the people that are into hunting and it's in a way it's same team. You guys, you want to preserve the hunting lands and have an abundance of wildlife, and the conservation model with tags and it being regulated, you can't just go shoot anything, has worked. And that's the kind of the tragedy of all this is if these people on the far left that are, claiming to be the biggest environmentalists would just realize that, guys that look like you, Dan, are actually the biggest allies for conservation. But in a different way, and it's proven through these models that the whole world tries to emulate, but you end up being made the villain in the story, and you guys are the ones spending time in the backcountry and seeing, wildlife, in the wild and what that looks like, and they're not going to the, we go to the Western Hunt Expo every year and go to the big conservation banquet, and they're raising, I would assume, tens of millions of dollars, and it's all about wildlife conservation, right? And you talk to any of the older men there, they're talking about wanting to pass this down to their kids, make sure that there's, preserving the hunting lands for their children. And it's not like a bunch of bloodlust of, I just want to kill animals. There's a genuine appreciation for, the wildlife and it's part of the ecosystem. It's the food chain. You harvest an animal, you eat it, you feed your family. And now I know some people are just generally against that, and I don't blame them for that. Particularly, a lot of the ladies are not too stoked on it, but it is the reality of life. And, so Dan, we'll be rooting for you. This is, quite a different topic than what we usually cover, but very fascinating stuff. And this is something we'll keep tabs on. But Tony, you got anything else for Dan?
I just want to call out, kind of first off, say thank you for all the work you're doing on something like this. And it's obvious your passion and just your experience, the breadth of knowledge you have over 30 years is insane. And I think something you said earlier is applicable to not just what you're working to support and defend, but just us as an American people. I think it's a founding principle of who we are and should kind of strive to be. And it's when you said that, like, hey, I understand some of these people, and you were speaking specifically to the people within the government, they have a mortgage to pay, they have bills to feed, they have mouths to feed. But at some point as a people, we have to we have to put our self-protective mechanism, which is hard to do, on a lower rung than kind of our ideals, values, and truths. Meaning, like, we have to strive to be something more and kind of put our self-protection on the back burner, just in the reference of financial protection. Because if we don't, things like this will continue to happen, both like what you're seeing in Colorado, but then as a country. And quite literally, we will erode from the inside out because nobody was willing to stand up and make a stand and say, hey, this doesn't make sense anymore, or this is against my values. And if enough people do that, the tide can shift quick. But there's a level of kind of risk and courage that has to be kind of embodied to do that. So I appreciate you fighting the good fight and doing it over the last 30 years. I think we need more people like you, and appreciate you coming on here and sharing your knowledge.
No, and I appreciate it too. And if it's all right, I mean, if anybody's interested in trying to help support, they could check us out at savethehuntcolorado.com and look at the videos that we got. Look at the language of the measure. You can donate on there. There's a shopping cart on there if you want to turn around and support us. We need money to be able to turn around and do this. You have to fight, money with money in this deal. You're fighting a campaign, and the extremist campaign is well funded. I don't think they're well argued, but they're well funded. So like I say, you can lie as much as you can, but you can buy screen time to lie as much as you can. We just have to buy screen time to be able to debunk the lies. But they can follow us on Instagram at CRWM, stay up to tune of what's going on for this particular issue. But it's something that we see that other states are really trying to figure out a way to jump on board in preparation for what they know is yet to come to their state. And not only are they watching closely, but they're trying to help us out here to be able to defeat those measures. So go to savethehuntcolorado.com. And I think here next week, or whenever you guys are going to air this, Robbie Kroger with Blood Origins is doing the Paramount Theater documentary debut of Lionheart in downtown Denver. Big red carpet deal for the media. And we're doing everything, and we're doing everything off the cuff. We're writing this roadmap as we speak because we don't have the treasure map of the X at the end of it, except for November 5th. However we need to get there is the route we're going to take, and we intend on being victorious. But with guys like you and Born Primitive and everybody else that's been willing to support us, I think we can accomplish that. But it'll be a victory for the entire hunting, angling, conservation community. And I just don't want anybody to turn around and think that it's not capable of happening, because if you think that, you can't accomplish anything. So with that, I appreciate your guys' help and opportunity, and we'll damn sure try to keep you in the loop of what's going on. And and try to keep you in the conversation of what we intend on doing and what we do after the victory as well.
Heck yeah. Yeah, it's almost like, Dan, you have spotted the Trojan horse before the plan is enacted, right? You know, and you're getting the word out. So I hope you successfully do that, and we'll absolutely be keeping an eye on this. And you obviously got an ally in Born Primitive over here, so don't hesitate to reach out if we can support in any way. And appreciate your time today.
Good deal. Appreciate it, guys. Look forward to the victory and look forward to the celebration of their defeat.
Awesome.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.